first episode of Vela Health Podcast. This podcast is dedicated to cycling, improving our health and fitness through things that are adjunct to cycling, but also to cool platforms. Our first episode is with David Tinker, the developer of Intervals.icu. Super cool software that helps us understand how to track our metrics. He's going to tell us about how he developed it, what inspired him, and help us understand how it works and future software updates and features that are coming our way. So join on Vela Health. Look forward to future podcasts. So much, David, for joining, and welcome to the podcast. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no, it's good to be on it. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much. You've been so busy. I noticed you rolled out a software update, in fact, just very recently.
Yeah, we do several times a day, actually, usually rolling out updates.
That is fantastic.
It's better to code small things and get them out quickly. So if something goes wrong, you know what you just broke. Basically,
that's awesome.
That's the strategy.
That's awesome. Well, so obviously I'm a huge fan, and so are many of my colleagues and friends, and I think many users across the world of Intervals.icu. So I was going to ask, just by starting, if you could just take me to the beginning and tell me a little bit about sort of your journey, maybe through software, and how that intersected with fitness and cycling. Maybe start with the software side, if that's how it started for you versus...
Yes. Yeah, no, I've always been writing software since I was about 11 or 12. So, and when I was 35, I was fat and unfit and decided, okay, I need to fix this. So I started with running, but that only lasted 3 months because I've got 2 dodgy knees. And then I started cycling. Yeah. And then, quite a number of years into that journey, I wanted to analyze talk intervals. And I was just using Strava then, couldn't figure out how to get that to work. I didn't know anything about Golden Sheet or any other tools. So I thought, let me write some software to do this, because I also needed to try out a new front-end framework for my day job. Needed to test it on a real project first before using it at work. I wrote the basics of intervals, just analyzing intervals, basic calendar page. And I released that after about 3 months, only integrating with Strava, and it quickly got quite popular. That was about 7 years ago. And since, it didn't take too long to become a second job, actually, but it took me a long time to extricate myself out of my day job so I could work on it full-time. I'm now working on intervals full-time with 2 other people, so a team of 3 now, which is great. So we're progressing things as quickly as we can.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I can only imagine. We'll get into it a bit more, but the back end architecture, and I think one of the things that Intervals really shines on, and I think all the user base feels the same, is just the depth of analytics, even the speed of the graphical user interface and the amount of metrics that you have. But before we get into that nitty gritty, I was going to say, so you were mentioning just a little bit about the software background. So maybe we'll start on the sports side. So on your fitness journey, how did that sort of begin? You said running, and then did that transition to cycling, and kind of what do you do these days mostly?
I do pretty much only cycling, mostly road cycling. I've had one knee replaced already, and the other one's not in great shape, so can't go anywhere near running. So cycling's great. I'm quite competitive, so I got quite into it quite quickly, and if you train hard at cycling, you get good at it quickly. It's lots of fun, basically. That's awesome. Yeah, that's where it came from.
Any gravel events or gravel cycling these days, or purely on the road?
No, mostly on the road. I have a mountain bike, and I have a hard time keeping that on a trail, so I've stayed away from gravel. I'm not the most skilled, so...
That's quite amazing. Mm-hmm. So you've been cycling for many years, and that's amazing. I was going to say, so where does the name come from? I mean, I have some hypotheses, but I'm not exactly sure, so it's obviously best to ask the founder and creator of this amazing platform.
It's a hospital reference, because if you're doing your intervals properly, you should feel like you need to go to the ICU. That's basically
that is amazing. Where it came from. I can't believe it. As an ICU doctor myself, I was like, wait a minute, is this ICU or intensive care unit? Yeah. And that's actually remarkable.
Yeah, it actually wasn't the greatest choice, because I have a lot of email deliverability issues, because a lot of places will just block anything from an ICU domain, which is a huge pain. So I should have probably chosen something else.
That's quite remarkable. That's quite remarkable. I guess that all fits into the logo. I think you have a heart. There's a bit of a heart rhythm on there as well.
Yeah.
If your intervals are hard enough, you'll end up in the ICU. That's amazing. That's very interesting. Have you had any, you've had any users get back to you and say, oh my gosh, it's helped me detect something about my health, or it's the platform has given me an insight into something about my cardiac fitness or something like that? Has that ever happened?
No, not directly, but Intervals does integrate with Crickles, which is some software for doing exactly that, for analyzing heart rate data and telling you whether you are going to have arrhythmias or you potentially vulnerable to that. So that has been one proper medical application of Intervals. My wife's actually had the ablation procedure from having arrhythmia, so I have had some experience of that.
Yeah, I mean, this actually might be a fun time just to comment on my end. Obviously, this is your stage and very important, but it is interesting that cycling, essentially endurance sports, puts us at risk of arrhythmias in some people, and it's quite unclear how to know that, and it's because essentially we're all a little bit hypertensive during exercise, which is quite normal, and then what happens is in the chambers of the heart, some people's chambers expand, and some people's chambers expand without atrial fibrillation or arrhythmias, and then others are quite remarkably resistant to it, and others are more sensitive. But what's interesting is, in the era of wearables, and that's kind of where Intervals again really shines. You've integrated the platform with so many different kind of providers of the data platforms, and even directly the hardware. And that's kind of the interesting thing I guess we'll talk about is when you look at the parallels of what's happening in software engineering and what's happening with bicycles. So for example, on the software engineering side, you can imagine there are all these standards, more than I do, all the back-end standards and the various ways that you must be kind of in a particular framework. And then on the cycling side, there's also a similar thing where there's a bit of a push and pull about standards with regards to for example the bottom bracket or right now the UDH, the back end of the bike with derailleur compatibility and kind of the two biggest vendors. Do you find any parallels between kind of the software engineering side and the precision that's required to do this level of fitness tracking? Like, what are the parallels that you've sort of seen when you do this type of work, being an expert software engineer on the back end, but then also a cyclist?
No, not too many parallels. I mean, the back end, you need to be, Intervals manages a huge amount of data. There's not a lot of room for recovery if you make an error, because there's 100,000 or something activities coming in every day. So you have to be very careful not to make any mistakes. The database servers are quite powerful to handle the load and all the rest of it. Yeah, so not too many parallels with bicycles, I don't think.
Just maybe the precision aspect.
Yeah, there's that.
You're a precise guy.
No, yeah, I mean, you don't want your bike to break on you when you're hurtling down a hill or something, I suppose. So there is that.
Do you see compatibility issues at all in the future with the frameworks that you've selected for the back end, or you've gone, given your kind of industry experience, it sounds like you've gone with super like stable, future-proof, almost database and back end.
Yeah, no, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, the number one rule is use technologies that you already know or have mastered, and I've done that. But they're also things very widely used in industry, so good picks from that point of view.
That's awesome.
The front end side is much more complicated in that respect.
Well, interesting. Yeah, interesting. Was there a part of your fitness journey that you said, okay, I need to, like you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but there was a portion of this that made you say, the software platforms that are available to me at this time are not sufficient. I need something a bit more detailed and maybe different types of metrics and so on. And so what was that for you that said, okay, I need to make this?
Well, initially it was just I'd read somewhere you need to do like low cadence, high torque intervals to develop strength and whatever, and I couldn't see any easy way to analyze that. At the time, I didn't know about Golden Cheetah and WKO and these other things, so I wrote code to do it and to find the intervals in the power automatically and so on. It was just a fun project. I mean, I learned since then. I've learned a great deal about cycling training and power modeling and all the rest. I mean, you kind of have to, I'm a software developer, not a scientist, so I try and find other people's papers and then go implement that, basically.
Well, you've done an amazing job. It is actually, I would say, it's a very scientifically oriented, if you will, a platform as far as the metrics and even the way things are graphed. And when maybe we'll talk about that as far as when you look at, when one clicks on their profile, you get kind of a small bar of metrics, and if you click on that, you get these deeper metrics, which also gives you comparison charts of kind of where you are in this season and the previous season, and in fact across the user base based on age, which is something fantastic. Was that presumably evolved as you had more and more users, and then you sort of thought about that comparison? Is that right?
Yes, yeah, no, that's exactly how it came about. Also, I wanted to see for myself because I'm on the wrong side of the age curve, so I'm not hitting PBs all that
We're
often.
still on the right side of the grass. We're still on the right side of the grass, is what we say in healthcare.
So, it's useful I made all the parametrics and everything per season, so you can start a new season and start off on a fresh slate, which also helps if you're getting older. And yeah, you want to compare yourself to your peers. I mean, there's no point in comparing yourself to a 20-year-old person if you're 54, for example. Just for that. So in the beginning, there actually weren't very many age brackets because there weren't enough people on the platform to have enough sample size. But I've since added more. As people have asked, I said, why isn't there a men's under 17 bracket? Okay, I'll go put that in there. Because there's enough people in it now. So that's basically how those things grew.
Yeah. And that should be lauded, actually, in the sense that your email is essentially right there on the interface on the first page, and folks can, I'm sure, now that you've obviously been doing it full time for some time, that people can request feature requests and updates, and the team seems to be very responsive, actually.
Yeah, we try to. I do get quite a few email inquiries, but also lots of things come up on the forums.
Yeah.
And every now and then I'll go through the forums, mostly looking for bugs. But if somebody asks for something simple that fits into the product, we'll just implement that straight away, rather than just putting it on a list somewhere.
That sounds right. Is there a preferred method, just while we're on that topic, where you would say users should chime in on stuff? Would it be the forums? Would be the preferred method, for example?
Yeah, there's a feature requests category in the forums, which we keep an eye on, and those you can actually like those if you like the feature, and those are displayed ranked based on how many likes the original post has. So that gives us some idea of popularity of something, particularly if something's actually quite difficult to do. We need to think carefully about that. So that's a good, and also sometimes the feature you want might actually already exist somewhere in intervals, or you might be able to build a custom field for it or whatever in there. Some very good people on the forums who spend a lot of time answering questions who will point you in the right direction. So it all
that's quite
helps.
amazing.
We don't have like a support department and so on, so have to be careful about that. So the forums are incredibly helpful for that.
The software actually kind of highlights different folks on the forum in one of the icons in the top bar. I've noticed that. Is there a logic that sort of, what's the back end of how it kind of decides who it's going to feature there? Or
those are actually coaches who've actually asked to be visible on the platform, or
fantastic.
who I've asked. So, you can ask them questions about training, and in return, maybe they'll get some business. That's the kind of model. There's no fee to appear in that list. You just have to complete your bio on Intervals so people can see what sort of coaching you do, and your language and where you're situated geographically and so on. That'll be a factor for a lot of people in choosing a coach.
That's amazing. So every user does not see at an instantaneous moment the same person in that bar, or do they?
If they have a coach, somebody's actually coaching them on intervals, that coach will always appear up there, whether they're visible to the public or not, first in the list, and then the rest of the list is shuffled. But if you now actually have a coach, they'll always be their face first, and they'll be first in the list.
That's really quite cool. What do you think from your perspective, because of the landscape, again, as a cyclist, and you've used different platforms, and obviously this platform, even trying to remain somewhat unbiased, but just, the kind of the scientific mind that you are, what would you say is the unique feature of intervals and the insights? I mean, I have certainly some thoughts, but like, when you look at what's out there, there's obviously a bit of lock-in based on hardware. And I think, certainly some vendors will always be kind of going that direction where the hardware is tied to a particular cloud platform or software platform, and that's really the lock-in. But as you said, the data analytics and even the rapidity of how the software loads, how nimble it is, those things are kind of issues. Like, what would you say are the differentiating features of intervals? And if you had to make a pitch, like, why would someone want to have either a concomitant subscription to intervals or just that's the place where they put all their data?
Well, the first thing, Intervals isn't tied to any particular manufacturer, as you pointed out, and the API is open, so any user on Intervals can make API calls. They can get their data out, and Intervals has got lots of integrations that integrate with the platform to extend it. Yeah, the main, from a straight up user's point of view, the main thing we're trying to do is to make it easy to get analytics, particularly over time things, the things you can kind of plot on the fitness page. Obviously, intervals is a little bit complicated, and we're busy with a big refactoring of the front-end code base, which should be done in a couple of months. And then one of the things we're going to tackle is to try and improve the UX to make it easier, in particular for new users, less technical users. That's one of its weaknesses, is that it's difficult to get into.
Yeah, I guess I guess the cool part is with things like this, the podcast and YouTube and things like that, you can quickly get the message out there about certain things, and presumably you have to be in that balance of, it is unique because it is so scientific. It is unique because it looks so like the dashboards are so sophisticated, and it's that balance of not making it too simple versus keeping it quite involved. And I suspect that's your UI user interface team and yourself, or that's kind of an interesting challenge to figure out. Do you keep it sort of very simplistic, or do you still capture that essence of kind of partly what intervals really is how amazing it is, how in depth it is?
Well, quite a few months ago, we actually did a revamp of the calendar page, and we made it look a lot better. But some things disappeared, and that was a mistake. You can't take anything away because there are just zillions of people asking for that stuff to come back. So we had to put everything we took away to simplify things back with options and so on. So,
software updates.
Yeah, so
always break something.
Well, we had to make it very configurable. So, if you're a power user, you could see all your stuff back on again, but it was still easier for a new user. So it would be that kind of model. To make it easier to get into, but the detail will still be there. One of the things we could do is the panel above an activity which shows you all the detailed stats. That could be much simpler. There's already functionality in intervals where you can go customize that yourself and select from different layouts. So that's how we could still accommodate users who just want to see absolutely everything there, while making it easier for new people and so on. So
like a custom dashboard, almost like a custom dashboard. Yeah.
Well, you can, that panel at the top, you can change which fields are there. Yeah. You can move them around and all the rest. So we can still accommodate power users that way.
That is pretty cool. When you look at the data coming in, without obviously divulging any personal information, what are some of the cool trends that you've noticed over time as the user base has grown? And you don't have to obviously discuss how many users there are unless you wish to, but there's obviously thousands of users on the platform. And I'm just saying that when I click on my age category, I can see, how I'm being compared to, in my case, for example, 7,000 plus users. What interesting trends have you seen? As also, I think cycling has gotten a bit of a resurgence after COVID, after the pandemic. What are the kind of the cool trends you've seen on the back end when you kind of look at the aggregate data?
Just an increasing number of users, more data coming in. I haven't actually had a lot of time to drill down into demographics and so on. I did, after COVID, I noticed there were more women cycling around where I am, at least, on the roads, but that hasn't translated into an increase in intervals demographics. It's still 90% male, unfortunately. I haven't really looked at the trends too much. It's just a business running the platform and all the rest of it, so...
we just got to get the word out there. We got to get the word out there, and obviously it's something that you want to. It's obviously it's something amazing that you're a proponent of everybody across all ages and categories. I do think, with what's happening with, if you will, AI, in the sense that people are able to, use any of the search apps and even browsers now and take a screen capture and literally point, a device to an interface and say, hey, how does this work? What do I do with this? I think hopefully things will get easier to sort of play around with and use. In fact, there'll be a lot more probably intelligence built into the browser and the applications because the computer will be able to see what the user is seeing in some ways. So it's kind of very interesting how that goes.
Well, there are quite a few people actually exploring those sort of things with integrations of intervals, actually, kind of chat LLM-driven chat interfaces to talk about your training data and so on, and to generate workouts and things. So I'm interested to see how those progress. Are
they working with you? That was actually one of my questions too. Like, is that something that you folks are going to be using, or is that something because it's the same thing. You can make these application program interface calls to a vendor. The cost obviously is something to think about because the cost structure of intervals is quite amenable to people using it. If you were to, for example, make application calls to OpenAI or some other vendor to intrinsically allow the user within the platform to have a chatbot. Is that something like what is your landscape or mind map of where that goes? Is that something you're looking to the user base to develop or other partners, or is that something you've thought about integrating into your software, much like Strava has tried and Garmin has tried, and without obviously the reception of those has been they're still kind of in beta, and it's actually quite to be open and fair to them, they've said it's in beta, but the reception to those outputs has been lukewarm because of it has the same issues that language models typically have. It's a bit sycophantic, it's not very detailed, it's kind of generic. So most users still say, I'm not really sure what this output, what it's going to do to me from a training perspective. What are your thoughts on implementation and what you see going forward with LLMs?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you. I was saying, what do you see moving into the future with regards to the LLMs and how you want to implement it, and kind of where you see this going?
We are looking at that. We're quite close to releasing a plan builder that does, traditional planning where you can specify your ramp rates, and every third week you want to be easy and that kind of thing for different sports. That's quite close to done. That just generates targets. So then a next step would be some sort of automatic generation of workouts. But there are quite a lot of people doing that, integrated with intervals. So we're quite keen to see how all those things play out. As you point out, there is cost implication. So, that's another tricky thing. If it turns out to be quite expensive, we'd have to charge people more money for that or something similar. But one, it's been suggested on the forums that we actually make it easy to integrate those tools using that coach interface you already mentioned in the UI. So you could chat to an AI coach, which is something that somebody's written externally to intervals or built into intervals. That kind of conversational view. So we're looking to potentially expand the API to support that kind of application, which would be nice. Yeah, so some people, there's a tool under development called Bamboo AI, which integrates with intervals and some other platforms, which actually does proper data science on the data. So you can ask questions on LLM and it actually generates Python code to go explore the data set and plot charts and everything. It's quite amazing. That is quite expensive to operate. So that, I've been talking to the developer of that tool quite a bit. And it's amazing what he's doing, but it also shows the complexity of getting these things to actually work properly. All the hurdles he's having to jump. We have a lot of, almost like run-of-the-mill functionality we haven't developed yet, which would also extend the platform. So we also have to balance out with just doing normal features. So we'll see what happens with the AI stuff. But I've been able to chat to an AI coach that can actually properly understand your data and help you out like you would a human coach would be amazing. So we're watching to see how those things go.
I totally agree. And I think this is an interesting point of discussion. I think there's a couple of things happening on the AI side, as you know. One is that language, the models are being distilled into more capable and smaller models, which are presumably less expensive to run and take up less computational resources. At the same time, what's interesting is that it's not clear where the fitness sort of AI thing is going, because, like, for example, intervals is very data rich. And I've tried this a few times. You could take just screen captures of this rich data, put it into a chatbot and say, give me a plan maybe for next week only. And in fact, with certain language models, like for example, Google's platform, depending on the tier of Gemini, you can say, give me a schedule and put it in my Google Calendar, and it'll go ahead and do that. And so it is an interesting conundrum to, do you put the investment and all the software back end to have chatbots and integration of chat into the platform versus is the data sufficient in the context of more and more intelligent models such that just giving it the data, it will be sufficient to provide a little bit of intelligence, because most people may already have a subscription to a language model, and so that investment ultimately may not be what's needed anyway. It's interesting, all of the software vendors have it in beta. I think Whoop says beta, Strava I'm pretty sure says beta, Garmin for sure says beta. And who knows what who they're paying, like what the back end model is, because clearly I will venture that they haven't trained their own language model or even fine tuned it, that they're using something off the shelf.
No, I'm pretty sure they'll be using something off the shelf. Maybe they can strike a deal and get it a bit cheaper than everybody else, but otherwise it's going to be costing them a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think that the fact that users can now, without any significant computational background. For example, I don't know if you've seen what Google rolled out recently with anti-gravity,
Yes,
where,
I have.
yeah. So anti-gravity, just for those who may be listening may not appreciate, so anti-gravity is an integrated development environment, which is what programmers use to make software. But usually when you do that, you are interacting with the computer itself when you're running the code, and anti-gravity kind of runs everything in the background. You just chat with it and it writes the code. It's a so-called sort of vibe coding. Now, obviously, for writing amazing software like Intervals, it's never going to kind of write a prompt and it's going to generate something like that. But when it comes to, for example, talking to Intervals and getting some of the data out of Intervals and doing something personal, it is a hop and a skip away for it to be able to do that. Is that also, like, what are your thoughts on that? And is that also a consideration of saying, hey, we'll focus on what we do well and what people want, rather than writing sort of this other type of stuff where it's more personalized? It's kind of an interesting conundrum of what to do, but the technology, the question is, what is the barrier for people who are less tech savvy to be able to do such things? Kind of, where do you see that going?
Well, one of the things we're looking at is to actually make the Intervals API play more nicely with tools like that, to make it easier for LLMs to actually call and understand what data they're getting. That's one thing we are definitely going to do. There's work we can do there. Another side effect of this is every now and then I get emails from people who vibe coded something, but they're not actually software developers. And they're having a pretty hard time just making basic API calls. So there is that. And
that is true.
Also get a fair number of emails from people who've obviously used an LLM to try and figure out how to do something in Intervals, and it's hallucinated a feature which just isn't there. And now they're trying to find it.
Wow.
It's like, sorry.
That feature doesn't exist. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
This is actually a good public service announcement about LLM. So the more complex the LLM, the more creative it is. The downside is it hallucinates the most.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, Google on the back end, I'm just going to give them a shout out, that they tend to, for example, certain aspects, keep LLMs that are not very creative, and they're very good at just doing what they're told. Notebook LM is an example of that. It's not a creative model at all. You just, like, for example, to your point of taking the literature, and let's say there was let's say tomorrow a new metric came out called, I don't know, heart rate variability squared, or something. If you wanted to then implement that, you could actually get the raw scientific paper, stick it into Notebook LM, and potentially distill some of the information out of it, and then maybe write the code separately.
Well, that tool I was talking about, Bamboo AI, it can actually do that. You can point it at papers and it'll pull the data out of Intervals and actually implement the stuff in the paper. It's quite amazing.
That is quite amazing. But I will say now, putting on my, again, mostly I'm going to talk to cyclists, but as a scientist hat, when you look at the quality of publications in the sports field, the N values, like the number of people in those studies, is quite small compared to what happens in medicine. And it is interesting that, they'll do something like a classic one I saw recently was talking about kettlebells and how, kettlebell activity is maybe not very helpful compared to sheer weights, and the N value is like 16 people, and they're all very healthy and young, and it's like, well, not everybody can do squats. They're going to have a bulging disc, and maybe they should be doing kettlebell. So there's nuances that I think someone like it's amazing to the developer and essentially, as you said, a competitive athlete, be in the driver's seat of software implementation, who's got a bit of a scientific mind, rather than purely sort of looking at N values of 16 people. And then kind of writing off an entire type of exercise regimen, saying based on this paper, this doesn't work. Because we certainly don't do that on the medical side. Like, we're talking thousands of patients. Cardiology is famous. They'll want tens of thousands of patients to make a decision.
Yeah, well, there's a reason why coaching is art and science. There's a lot of things coaches kind of know that they work, but nobody's managed to put a study together.
That's right.
Reliably. So.
That's actually a really good point. That's actually a really good point. I think that's a really important plug for the coaches on Intervals as well, because you're totally right. There's so many things even I do on a daily basis on the medical side that really make the difference, and they're not published. It's just a gestalt of kind of what's going on, and you nailed it. So, to your point, like language models or whatever model it is only still going to be learning. They're not intelligent enough yet to kind of de novo come up with new science. They really are not. And so if the data is not out there, they're not going to propose some regimen that the user may benefit from extremely without actually talking to a human being. Actually, you just made a very important point.
There are a lot of coaches do have blogs and things where they'll say the kind of stuff that they do. It might not be scientifically validated or whatever, so we'll still find those.
That is also very true. That is also very true. Very good point. Do you see the business of like this is just a hypothesis by myself. Now, when one buys a piece of hardware like from a top vendor, that piece of hardware is well refined and typically will lock in the user into that platform. Now, Intervals is able to still get that data by connecting with that vendor. Do you see a future where there will be more open source hardware coming? Do you think we're going to, like in 10 years time, you'll be able to order parts of a watch that you just kind of put together or click together, or some sort of open hardware that then gives people the ability to get the key metrics they want and then use it with Intervals? Or do you foresee, or do you kind of have to be in both worlds right now, which is to work with partners like directly with, let's say, Garmin or directly with Whoop, but at the same time be able to take data from Strava, that kind of thing?
Yes, Intervals has to try and connect to all of the device manufacturers, and some of them are actually quite difficult to get hold of, and actually get involved with. Garmin are pretty good. You can ask them and they'll give you access. They've always been good like that. Other developers are much harder to get hold of. Yeah, I'm not sure about the open source fitness devices. I think it's quite a business to make the hardware reliable and all the rest of it. Otherwise, I think probably would have seen quite a bit of that by now.
That is a good point.
But I don't know too much about manufacturing hardware, so maybe.
Yeah, maybe. It's an interesting thing. You think about like if sensors become widely available with certain type of connections, and then people like can 3D print something for that sensor, then they can get a custom piece of hardware that they wear.
Yeah, but somebody else could just if the sensors get cheaper, the devices get cheaper, and somebody can still manufacture it in a normal commercial way. And maybe at a price point you can't match. If you 3D printing stuff yourself. So,
do you do any on Intervals? Is there just came to me? Do you do any interpolation? So interpolation would be that the data is somehow not great or it's patchy. So for example, in my own world, like in my own very humble experience, I'll have let's say a 3-hour race, and then I'll look at it again and I'll say, oh my God, there's all this dropout. Like somehow the Garmin, it's not Garmin's fault or not, but essentially there was a dropout of power or a dropout of heart rate, or there's some data dropouts. Maybe even in a key segment that I was really interested in. Do you do any interpolation, so kind of fitting between gaps of data within Intervals as it tries to understand trends, or is it all purely based on the actual data points?
No, Intervals does interpolate, and it automatically fixes short power dropouts. Those are actually fairly common. And sometimes it's quite obvious in the data that it's there. Intervals will do that. There are also tools where you can manually ask it to fix much bigger problems, or you can go and you can select a portion of your activity where the heart rate data is just missing, and you can more or less guess what your heart rate was, and you can say just fill it in with this value. But Intervals does do interpolation on power and heart rates. Obviously, if your heart rate's 0, that's not correct.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It'll try and fill that in up until a point. But if the gap is too big, it'll leave it, and you need to fix it yourself if you want to fix it.
Have you done a comparison then of the metrics such as VO2 max, power at different zones with different platforms, and maybe even your own fitness journey, to know that some of the interpolation that's done is actually probably more accurate? Because there is quite a bit of variability between even VO2 max, what's reported on, for example, what an Apple Watch will say versus what Garmin will say, which is what Intervals will say, and what Whoop will say. I will say again, leaving you the expert developer outside, I will say that the numbers are definitely lower and more congruent between Apple Watch, Whoop, and Intervals compared to the Garmin. Garmin, for me anyway, gives me a much higher VO2 max sometimes compared to, for example, Whoop or Apple. Again, the lab is the gold standard, but most of us can't go into a lab.
Yes, so those platforms, I actually don't know how they work out their VO2 max numbers. Intervals uses, the VO2 max estimate in Intervals is just based on your 5-minute power from a paper I found, where they measured a whole lot of people in a lab and they fitted a line for their 5-minute power to what their measured VO2 max numbers were. So Intervals uses a formula like that, which is quite simple from your 5-minute power. I don't know how the other manufacturers estimate VO2 max. It's all their secret sauce, so they don't tend to publish it. So,
what do you find is the best metric for recovery as far as the data? What do you find that, because one of the amazing things about Intervals is that I can quickly glance at it. And again, even different, and then some vendors are being criticized for not having that as much, like for example, Apple. Again, they're probably working on it, but still, intervals, you can quickly look at it, including the companion app, and say, maybe today is not a good day to push hard, or today is actually a really good day to push hard. What do you find scientifically or from the data being the best metric to understand recovery?
Personally, I look at what my heart rate does in the beginning of the ride. If it's much lower than normal or higher than normal, then I will take it easy. And obviously how my legs feel. So mostly the heart rate response is what I look at. I found that to be the best thing. But
That's
also
awesome.
just a lot on feel. I've got a good
Yeah, I
idea
totally
what I
agree
should
with
be feeling like and take it from there. Like earlier this week, my heart rate was easily 10 points higher than it normally is. So I thought, geez, am I getting sick or what? So I took it very easy on that ride. My legs felt fine, but I still took it easy. I thought maybe I'm getting sick. But I didn't get sick.
That's what I've noticed as well. I mean, it's almost like right now to me, again, kind of putting on the athlete face, but also kind of thinking about it as a doc, is like the heart rate variability when that tanks. And also when resting heart rate goes up, there's clearly the body is not recovered, or there's illness coming, some sort of viral illness, given that we're kind of in respiratory season, certainly in North America. The heart rate variability is an interesting one, because the heart rate variability, the best explanation I've heard about it is that we think of the heart as a very precise clock. In fact, it's one of the only things in our body that's extremely precise and very much rhythmic, because rhythmicity is actually very bad in other parts of the body. So for example, rhythmicity in the brain only happens during sleep, and the bad thing is like seizures. Most of the time, if you were to record from our brain right now, it looks like noise, and that's because many neurons are doing many things and they look out of sync. It looks like noise. In the heart, it turns out that even though it's very rhythmic, that variability, which is the units of that variability, as you know, are milliseconds. That variability is almost like the heart has a bit of dynamics to it, and dynamics in the heart is good. And it turns out that I think the best explanation I heard was that, it has to do with the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is a nerve from the brain that talks to a lot of the organs, and that variability is a sign of kind of how well recovered the body is and how fit the body is. And when the body's under stress, in fact, the heart becomes more uniform, and uniformity in the body is kind of bad. It's almost like biological systems like a little bit of noise, a little bit of variability is good for them. So that's been kind of an interesting insight into something that is very, very rhythmic, because most of the time rhythmicity is sort of bad. And this kind of brings that back to the heart, that, wait a minute, if the heartbeats are not variable, that's an issue. I don't know if we should explain what that is a bit more for the audience. Not everybody may understand HRV.
Yeah, I haven't had too much luck with HRV personally. I'm too lazy to do a proper measurement in the morning when I wake up, or by the time I remember I'm already drinking coffee or something, and then it's too late. So, and I found, nighttime measurements from wearables a bit all over the place.
Oh, I see.
So I haven't had too much luck, but I did read somewhere, it's something you can use if you've managed to control most of the other stress in your life. But that's it's difficult to do in real life.
That's right. That's your next app, how to control stress.
Yeah.
Reducestress.icu. That'll be your next app. That's awesome. So what do you see as the outlook for switching gears as to feature updates in the future and trends analysis? And I was particularly interested to know if you yourself are using AI in any aspect of coding, which will provide some insight into code, new metrics, for example, from papers.
Not so much insight in new metrics. So, the team, we use Claude Code a lot. It's a fantastic tool when you use it in the right places. That has speeded us up significantly. But no, I haven't had very much luck trying to get any of these tools to actually generate complicated code that won't be found on the internet somewhere. They're fantastic at migration tasks and fixing things and code reviews, very good at those. So we use it quite heavily for that kind of thing. But yeah, no, I haven't tried to do any proper science with them or had any luck with that.
That's awesome. May I ask, if it's not proprietary, what language you're using to develop intervals, just for the techies out there who might be listening?
The backend's written in Java, a very mainstream programming language used heavily in the corporate world, which has they care a lot about backwards compatibility. And Java libraries are very high quality. So it's actually great, and it's fast. It's a great language for something like intervals, which has to do with data analytics and so on. And it's strongly typed. which also cuts down on a lot of bugs. As opposed to, say, if Intervals was written in Python, for example, it would be much more difficult to maintain the project. Even though if some of the data science work would be quicker, Python's much slower than Java and loosely typed. It comes with a whole lot of risk for more bugs, etc. The front end is written in JavaScript, and we're busy about 2/3 of the way actually porting everything to TypeScript, which basically it's a typed extension of JavaScript. So again, we'll catch more bugs before they make it to production. So
the UI is super fast. Is that all Java? It's like super fast.
No, that's JavaScript.
Just JavaScript.
Yeah, we use Vue.js, a popular front-end framework with JavaScript, and now a lot of TypeScript. It's difficult to get the UI fast. The server actually has quite a bit to do with that as well.
Yes.
Intervals stores a lot of data on the client, and it's actually tricky to make it fast, but we have put some effort into it.
What do you see as the next features you're rolling out? As I said, I did read the new feature updates in the new bulletin. Maybe for the audience who may be listening to this at this particular time, what are some of the features you want to highlight that you're either just rolled out or features that you're about to roll out in the next, let's say, year or so? If it's things that you can discuss.
Yeah, no, for sure. We just added a list view to the gear. Intervals keeps track of your bikes and when your chain's going to run out, and it sends you reminders and so on. Well, for a long time, people wanted a tabular view of that data, so we've added that recently. We're working on a plan builder to generate targets. So you can pick a target event and your B events before that, and how much taping you want to do in order to generate load time or distance targets for each week.
Well, that's awesome.
So then you can go fill in workouts to match those targets if that's how you train, or you can just make sure you do the required number of hours and whatever else. So that's coming up soon.
Awesome.
It's quite a big piece of work. People again have been asking for that for a long time.
That's awesome. That's a huge feature, actually. If I may, is it going to allow you to put multiple targets? So, for example, race 1, race 2, race 3, race 4, race 5 in the summer, and kind of gauge it?
Yes, it does do that.
Amazing.
Yeah, no, that is there. I mean, that'll be we'll release that in beta soon. We're just trying to get it over the line, but every now and then something else comes up, so we actually can't get it finished. So it's nearly done.
Do you think there's science to be able to look at previous races of the exact? Because some of us are creatures of habit. We'll go to the same event, and so we'll do the same event every year. Do you think there's a bit of science to be able to go back 3 races and of the same race and you put that on the calendar and say, okay, I've noticed you've done this before, this is maybe how you should do your structured training leading up to that, perhaps.
The biggest race around here where I live is the Cape Town Cycle Tour.
Yes, beautiful.
And I've looked back at previous editions of that, and I know exactly, it's a series of 3-minute efforts, and I have to be able to do this much power in each of them, and the last climb is 5.5 minutes, and I was about 10 watts short this year, so I got dropped on that last climb and had to chase back. So I know pretty much what I've got to do when it comes around next year. I need another 10 watts after 2.5 hours of quite hard racing, so that's what I need to be able to do.
That's awesome. And then with the expansion of wearables, you were mentioning Intervals is open to working with every single vendor that's out there, essentially, right? Is there any vendors that if any of the engineers by chance happen to listen to this, you would say, please get in touch with you and say we would like to work with you, just in case that happens?
Some of the smaller cycle computer manufacturers, Brighton comes to mind. I haven't managed to get hold of anybody there. IGS Sport as well. People are saying, hey, I've got one of these. I want to get into your platform. Sorry. Those two on the cycle computer side.
Does Apple integrate? I'm trying to remember. I don't think
through third-party apps, yeah.
Through third-party apps, right.
There are a couple of apps that will get Apple data into Intervals, so that does work.
Like Strava, I presume, will do that.
You can go via Strava, but you can also go directly into Intervals. There are a couple of apps that do that. The Apple ecosystem, you can't get that data unless you have an app running on the device.
I know, that's the challenge.
Yeah.
Same as heart rate broadcasting, which is a huge issue in my opinion. Hopefully that'll be fixed in the future, allowing us to broadcast from an Apple Watch. Because the reason I'm saying that is that it appears to be one of the better sensors out there for wrist, because wrist is obviously not great. And just for the users out there, even to your point, in the hospital or we don't measure heart rate on the wrist. We measure it, at the fingertip with the oxygen sensors on the tip. So this is actually because of the bone and stuff. It's not the best place to be measuring heart rate. which is why I guess it's going into the headphones. That's an interesting thing. Like near the ear, in fact, is a good area to kind of get some of this
Really?
data. Yeah. Sometimes when people are having difficulty getting measurements in their fingertips, because it's more distal, it's more away from the heart, we put the measurement device closer to the heart, and the ear is an area. And so I think Apple has recently put in some heart rate sensing into the AirPods. The challenge with cycling is we don't want to have our ears covered for safety purposes, and so something up here, if it was able to have good skin contact, will provide better. Obviously, electrical is still the gold standard in a chest strap, but some people can't. Like I think, for example, as you said, for women and stuff, there hasn't still been the reviews I saw still hasn't been a great. Like it's not always fantastic to have there's a room for improvement for a broader group of users for electrical measurement of heart rate, for more comfort, like a 3-hour ride or something. That's awesome. Is there anything else that you wanted to sort of add to this topic, or things that you wanted to highlight about intervals and like the growth of the platform? Have you found that it's, go for it.
No, it's growing a lot. So Intervals currently has 137,000 monthly active users.
Amazing.
Almost 100,000 weekly active. So it's quite nice that so many of the monthly active users are actually on the platform every week, at least. So, I mean, that's good. It's quite a business to keep up with the growth.
Yes.
But, you know, the community is very good. A lot of people actually do subscribe, even though the free tier is very generous. A lot of people subscribe.
Yes.
And all the people on the forums help a great deal.
I will say it as a user. I think the free tier is quite generous, and as a plug just for yourself as a colleague, and there's no connection here. It's completely unbiased. But I mean, essentially, we're living in a world where the cost of the servers and running things goes a little bit higher, and when the users want more features, it's going to cost a little bit more. So I think I would encourage everyone to actually subscribe to Intervals and do it properly, because it's just such a fantastic platform, and who knows where the future of other platforms is going to be. And given how broadly it talks to different vendors, I think it's a great place, and it allows us to keep our data, which is really nice, because you never know, you might not get, like, I think I'm going to just ask you, I think there'll be never essentially a situation, because of the way that you are as a developer and as a cyclist, there'll never be a situation where someone can't get their data out, which is sometimes a problem with, the data goes and you can never get it back if the company goes belly up, for example.
Yeah, no, that's one of the core values of Intervals, is to keep it open.
Exactly.
Obviously, some of the suppliers won't let us give you their data, so we can't do anything much about that.
That's right.
But the ones that do, which is almost all of them actually, you can always get it out yourself, but we can't let it out through the API from some of the data sources, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Intervals, you can, if you want to get all your data out, you can do that. You can just download a zip of all the files, or you can connect Dropbox and it'll upload everything to Dropbox for you. That's all easy.
That's awesome. Are there any final things that you'd want the user base to know, or people who are interested to know about Intervals and kind of where it's heading, including the coaching ability and that human factor that you talked about, given such a scientific platform, such a kind of data-rich platform, should I say?
Yes, well, there are at least 10 people working on AI-related integrations of Intervals. Watching those quite closely, and as I mentioned before, we are considering extending the interface so you'd be able to have a proper chat interaction with a third-party application, which would be cool. And we might build some of that sort of stuff actually into Intervals as well, which will be great. Other than that, when we finished our big front-end refactoring, we're going to be having a look at the UX to try and make it easier to get into Intervals, to make it easier to understand, which is also important. And that will also let us develop an app. That's also something which is kind of pending on having the whole user interface refactored, so we can move things around and more quickly iterate on the code base. And we will build an app around Intervals. People have been asking that for a long time. So these are all awesome things. Yeah, hopefully in the next year or so we can get done.
That is awesome. I will certainly do my part, and any of the folks listening to this in the coming weeks and days and months, please do your part to get the word out there on Intervals to support this great platform, this open platform, very data rich, very nimble, and such an awesome developer and team. And thanks to all the members of your team and the folks in the forums that keep this going. We really appreciate it as the user base.
No, great. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for this. Thank you.
Cool.
Right.
Cheers.
Okay.